Hey, hi guys. From this video, I will try to write one small example to describe the Oauth flow. So before start the example, let's see the abstract protocol, how it is working. If you see the client, it's a third-party application. It is contacting with authorization server for getting the token with the help of user. After getting the token, again it is trying to communicate with resource server for getting the resources. So this is how the abstract protocol will work. Let's move on the next. Like these are the modules available in what authorization grant is actually telling the way you are getting token from the authorization server. For getting the token, we have multiple approaches: client credentials approach, authorization code, a device code. Let's go with one by one. Client credentials. If third party application is going with the client credentials approach to get the token, so in that case there is no resource owner. Its client application is directly talking to the authorization server for getting the token. So this we can call client credentials approach. If you take the authorization code, so there we have a resource owner. With the help of resource owner, if the client is getting token from the authorization server, so this approach we can call authorization code. So generally when we have the browser and there is a logged in user, in such case we need to go with authorization code. Client credentials, if there is no client and if the application is directly talking to some other application, so then in such case we need to go with the client credentials approach. And the device code, this is a different case where we don't have a browser and like TV devices or something. There we can use this device code approach. So this is not in my scope. I can show you how we need to write an example program for client credentials approach, authorization code approach. Okay, now if you see this architecture diagram, before start the program, if I divide this into two parts, the left part and the right part. So the right part we can consider what producer and the left part we can say like what consumer part. Let's start with the what producer part first. So if you want to convert your application act like a what a producer, we need to define the authorization server and the resource server, and we need to make a link between these two and also write some protected endpoint inside the resource server. If you complete all these things, then it can act like a OAuth producer. So let's start one by one. Initially, we'll go with the authorization server. Let me install this authorization server. So there is a Docker, or if you say this Kicklock is an authorization server. It's running in 8080 port. If you want to check the admin console, 8080 admin, I just logged in as an admin user. I can able to see the all Kicklock server related configuration part here. So what are the configuration I did here? We don't worry about this stage. I will show you. I will discuss all these things in an appropriate time. Okay. So next, move on this resource server. Okay. For defining the resource server, we have a starter dependency in the Spring Boot application. If you take this application, so there is a pom.xml. Here we have one dependency, Oauth resource server. So if you provide this dependency, now we are actually adding the resource server to your application. So the second part also got completed. Sorry. So the second part, resource server, also got completed. We need to make a link between these two servers. For that, go to the application.properties. So there is one property here. We need to add authorization server URL here, where the tokens are reside inside the authorization server. We need to provide the link here so that authorization and resource server can be able to communicate based on the circumstance. Now we successfully completed the linkage part as well. Now let's write some secure endpoint inside the resource server. Now let's go to the controller part. So I written one controller class here, student controller. Endpoint will be something like this: student status info. If any user call the status student info, now the authorization server will check whether the user has a valid token is there or not. If user has the valid token, it's allowed to call this endpoint, or else it will give you the unauthorized user kind of error to the caller. So now it's ready to act like a OAuth producer. As for this diagram, I completed all these things. Now try to deploy this into local thing. For deployment purpose, it's a Spring Boot. I can simply start like a Java application. Okay, now it is started. And what is the port number we used? 8081, I think. Let me check. Yeah, 8081 is the port number. Okay, so now go to the diagram part. OAuth producer we completed successfully. Now comes under OAuth consumer part. When it comes under OAuth consumer, so client has a choice like go with the client credentials and authorization code flow for getting the token. So simply what I can say, without resource owner or with resource owner, the client can get a token from authorization server. So for defining a client, I have again two choices. I can take the ready-made clients, or else I can define my own client program in Java also. For describing this example, I'm not going to define any new client code. I'm using existing clients. So take the Postman. Postman is can be act like a client to make a call to any other servers. So if you take this endpoint, 8081 is the port and the student status info. If I click on this, so we got 401 unauthorized error. So user don't have a valid token for getting the response from this server. So what happened here? The client without token, it is trying to contact to the resource server. So that's where we are getting this error. Now let's get the token from authorization server. For getting the token, we have a multiple options. Based on a grant type, we can get the token. So I want to go with the first approach, client credentials. In the client credentials, if you want to get the token, so there is one endpoint. I will show you that in the Postman first. If you say this Postman, so this is the endpoint. uh, 8080, the keyclock server is running in this port, and don't bother about this part. I will show you this at appropriate time. And endpoints end with token, and there are few things need to be entered here: client id, client secret, grant type. And these two information like client id and client secret, we can get it from keyclock server, authorization server. Let's hit the request. Now I got the token here. So using this token, I can make a secure endpoint call. Copy this token, go to here, authorization, and bearer, paste the token. Now this time it's allowed to call the secure endpoint. Let's see. Successfully got called that endpoint. If you take this diagram, So now what happened here? The client got the token from authorization server based on the client credentials approach. After getting the token, it is used to make a secure endpoint call with that token. So that's where a resource server is allowing to call that particular endpoint.